We are 79 days away from basketball season, and yes, after a brief summer break, we are back talking SEC basketball.
Today, we're catching you up on everything that's happened between March Madness and now. Plus, we're counting down the top five backcourts in the SEC in this upcoming season.
Yeah, let the preseason talking season begin today on the Hoop Southbound Show.
Well, in case you were living under a rock this offseason, it was an eventful one.
Yeah, what started out as an offseason that looked to have only a moderate amount of chaos turned into a Category 5 hurricane of crazy. If you're a casual fan who's catching up on what the heck happened this offseason, never fear. Let's walk you through this because this offseason, there was plenty to talk about.
Let's turn back the timeline now to kind of show everyone where we are now and how the heck we got here. So the major headlines of the offseason started out with a kind of expected story. On March 14th, Jerry Stackhouse was fired as the head coach of Vanderbilt. This was pretty expected after another letdown of a season in Nashville where the Commodores failed to make yet another NCAA tournament. Stackhouse had just previously been named SEC Coach of the Year prior, but the fan base had fully turned against him, and it was probably time for a change.
It's not every day a good coach gets fired, but recruiting issues had fully caught up to Jerry Stackhouse, and his fate was pretty much set in stone at the beginning of the year, honestly. Great play caller, not a great recruiter. But on the same day, also at the SEC tournament, Eric Musselman and the Arkansas Razorbacks just wrapped up an absolute disaster of a season. It was Eric Musselman's worst ever season as a college coach and was the worst season Arkansas had had in 15 years. A losing record and by far below the standard of what had been we'd grown accustomed to seeing out of Arkansas. Additionally, there was some rumors that Musselman might be interested in some other jobs that, should they come open, Musselman was nearing the end of his contract with Arkansas, and his buyout was relatively small. Arkansas was in uncomfortable waters at that given moment.
So we jump ahead to a week later to the NCAA tournament. Mark Pope had come in a favorite to beat Duquesne out of the Atlantic 10. However, a slow start ultimately cost BYU their tournament run. Pope still yet to win an NCAA tournament game. If you followed in the offseason, you get where we're going with this.
Yeah, so later that night, there's another big tournament upset. Jack Golke and Oakland set the world on fire from deep and upset Kentucky in the NCAA tournament. It marked the second time in the last 4 years that Calipari had failed to get out of the first round of the NCAA tournament. The loss was a disaster. Fans were upset. Things weren't looking good in Lexington. Additionally, Matt Norlander from CBS Sports and other commentators started hinting that this Oakland game might be the last game John Calipari coached in Kentucky. There were some rumors that Calipari had been interested in other jobs for a while, and there had been speculation that Kentucky athletic director Mitch Barnhart might fire Calipari and pay his absolutely massive buyout.
So moving on to March 22nd, number 12 seed James Madison is one of the most popular upset picks in the tournament, and they delivered quite the beating to Washington. A huge win for Mark Byington and the Dukes.
Wisconsin, yeah, Wisconsin, not what?
Oh,
Yeah.
Wisconsin.
You saw the W in the
Yep.
yeah,
Somewhere in there.
it
We're
happens.
getting there.
Enter the athletic directors of this situation now, this offseason story. So after rumors that Calipari might get fired and the Calipari era might be over in Lexington, Mitch Barnhart actually puts all these rumors down. Barnhart says that Calipari will return to Kentucky next season on March 26th. The news receives mixed reaction from Kentucky fans, but it seemed like Calipari would be back in Lexington for another year.
Yeah, and on that same line, it seemed like Arkansas athletic director Hunter Yurachek also had some good news for Arkansas fans. Yurachek sent out a tweet on March 28th with a video clip from Eric Musselman's extension back in 2021. It seemed like everything might have been worked out and Musselman would be returning to Arkansas for another season, despite rumors that he might be headed to another job. At the time, SMU was the strongest rumor who had just fired Rob Lanier.
And that theory looked to be real when UMass transfer Josh Cohen announced that he was transferring to Arkansas. However, the announcement still left Hog fans a little unsettled. First reporters were still holding out that Musselman had been looking at other jobs, and Cohen didn't say much about Arkansas in his transfer announcement, mostly talking about Musselman. And then the story got crazier. On April 1st, things got really uncomfortable in Arkansas. First, SMU hired Andy Enfield out of USC to be their new head coach. This sent shockwaves through several Arkansas fans who knew Musselman might take a job on the West Coast should a good one open up. Additionally, Hunter Yurachek went on a podcast called One Star Recruits, a podcast even smaller than this one, and said that the tweet didn't confirm Musselman's return.
And on May 4th, as the spiral continues in Arkansas, Eric Musselman was announced the new head coach at USC. Arkansas had now entered the coaching carousel officially.
And there were several names that were linked to Arkansas's coaching search, but on April 5th, all of those names denied the offer. Chris Beard was rumored to have signed an extension with, or he had signed an extension with Ole Miss, but it had been rumored that he hadn't signed the extension. Jerome Tang very quickly said that he was returning to Kansas State and denied by reporters on social media. And then Will Wade also denied on social media that he had an interview with Arkansas. The interview rumor was also out there in the ether. The situation of Arkansas's next coach looked like a disaster. No one had any clue what was going on. Some Arkansas fans were calling for Hunter Yurachek to be fired as athletic director.
Then the strangest names in the coaching search came into the rumor mill. Little Rock's Darrell Walker, Mississippi State's Chris Jans were rumored to be candidates for the Arkansas job on April 6th. A lot of Razorback fans were upset, and others were calling it a smokescreen for whoever the real candidate was. Little did anyone know, most of these reports throughout the whole weekend were mostly smokescreens and only fragments of what was actually going on in this coaching search.
Yeah, and that's the part that left everybody in chaos. On April 7th, this story went full crazy. There were reports that John Calipari was in Northwest Arkansas. Most everyone started making jokes and reports that these shouldn't be taken seriously until Wes Moore from Fox 16 and Little Rock dropped the bomb that the Calipari story was in fact real, and he was expected to be the next head coach at Arkansas. The story went national instantly, was talked about on ESPN, about everything. Every sports site in the country had it. This was the day before the national championship game, and it became the biggest story in college basketball in a moment.
So we flipped the calendar to April 10th, and it was official. John Calipari was named the new head coach at Arkansas. As it turned out, Arkansas had been in talks with Calipari for a while. After a conversation with Houston's Kelvin Sampson and some personal reflection, Calipari decided to become the new head coach of the Razorbacks. Enter Kentucky into the coaching carousel.
Yeah, Kentucky reached out to several high-profile coaches. They contacted Dan Hurley out of UConn, who had just won back-to-back national titles. A year ago, Mitch Morenhart reportedly expressed interest in Scott Drew as the next head coach of Kentucky. Drew also turned the Kentucky job down. At some point along the way, Kentucky had contacted Billy Donovan about the job, but the Kentucky did not want to wait for the Chicago Bulls season to come to an end for Billy Donovan. The coaching search had an entirely different list of candidates to that point, and one of the names that was met with mixed reaction was Mark Pope.
Now, Mark Pope is a Kentucky alumni and had support from his old coach, Rick Pitino. On April 12th, it was official. Kentucky hired Mark Pope as a new head coach in Lexington. The hire was met with, again, a mixed reaction from the fan base, but Pope has since won the opinion of several Kentucky fans during this first offseason.
Yeah, but with Calipari leaving Kentucky, a large portion of his freshman class decommitted from Lexington. Carter Knox, Boogie Fland, and Billy Richmond all took trips to Fayetteville and ultimately signed with the Razorbacks. Meanwhile, JQ and Santos Sorrell went elsewhere. Sorrell actually decided to stay in the SEC and join Mike White in Georgia.
This offseason, both Pope and Calipari have been successful in the transfer portal, bringing in top 5 transfer classes nationally. Mark Byington, the new head coach at Vanderbilt, also brought in 3 4-star transfers to Vanderbilt.
Yeah, and across the SEC, several schools were successful in the transfer portal as well. 7 teams were in the top 20 transfer classes, according to 24/7 Sports this offseason.
Some other headlines in this wild couple of months um, included fill-in signing with Alabama, Fear enters schools early for Oklahoma, Dillingham, Shepherd, Connect, all drafted in the first round. Bama ranked number 2 in the top 25 and number 1 by CBS. Tennessee ranked the Torvik top 5, and Arkansas signs Acuff to its 2025 class.
Absolutely crazy offseason. And understandably why we needed to take a break, because this one got really, really crazy. It was like, I'm kind of tired. We just did an entire season of basketball, and the first couple of weeks of the transfer portal and off-season coaching carousel was insane. I mean, absolutely insane. Maddie, kind of what were your thoughts, this off-season? Because yeah, no, we're now living in a reality where John Calipari coaches at Arkansas. Kentucky's in uncharted territory with a coach without a proven NCAA tournament record, but it's done well in the transfer portal his first offseason, and looks like there's some optimism. I mean, it's a crazy, crazy year. What were kind of your thoughts as you finally got a chance to sit down and digest this after we took a break from the pod?
Yeah, I mean, I think the best part in this all is, this cosmic karma kind of coming back to us, because I think it was around the end of February. We were like, we only have a few more weeks and then we get a break.
Yeah.
Nope,
Nope, was not going to happen.
not at all. So, I mean, like the rundown we just gave, a lot has happened. So it's going to be a wild ride in the SEC. Not only do we have 2 new teams coming in that we aren't used to, that have a lot of history, so it's going to pack a punch on its own. We have new everywhere.
Yeah, I
It
mean,
is.
Arkansas's got a complete roster turnover. Like 91% of their offensive production is gone. Trevin Brazil's the only scholarship player coming back. And then Kentucky, 100% of their offensive production was lost this offseason. So they're going to be completely new looks. We mentioned in there is that Kentucky was ranked second in the top 25 and won by CBS. They're considered right now that they have a legit chance to make a run at the Final Four again this season. And they look like a darn good basketball team. And they added a really strong freshman class and good transfer class to this roster that looks to help Bama get back and reach those goals. And they're pretty much right now, in most thought processes, the favorite to win the SEC coming out of this offseason. There's a lot of talk about this. We talked about Oklahoma a lot, in these lists of those other headlines. Fears entering school early, puts his name as one of the best incoming freshmen in the SEC this offseason, and what was just a not going well transfer class for Oklahoma. And so they really needed a boost out of somewhere, and they got it in Fears announcing that he's coming to school early. So it's been a wild year, and we've seen Calipari right here at the early recruiting cycle getting right back to what John Calipari does, and signs Acuff, at coming to Arkansas next year and reaching out to several high profile recruits. And Kentucky's doing a decent job themselves. So it's a brand new look. It's a whole new world. And we didn't even talk that much about Vanderbilt and what was their change of the guard now, and the whole new era they're entering, and what looks to be positive, very positive for them. And I'm kind of right now in a thought process that Vanderbilt might surprise a few people, even though they're being picked consistently last in this conference.
Yeah, I think it's just going to be one of those seasons where we're going to say, we don't know. I mean, it's a lot of unknown going into this, which kind of drives me crazy as an analytical person. I like to, know what's in front of me. So I think, you take a mix of all of this change and all the newness, and we're just going to have to sit in it and see what happens.
Oh, for sure. It's going to be an absolutely wild season ahead. So here we are. Let's talk about the top 5 backcourts to try to start some preseason content and conversation here, because I think this is an absolutely fun group of backcourts that the SEC has put together this year. So we did this last year. Some of those teams absolutely hit. Some of them were a little bit messier, like, Arkansas being on some of our lists last year, what looked to be very positive. So I know that had some impact on my thinking. Arkansas being an absolute disaster last year had an impact on the way that I'm kind of putting my list together this year. Also, Kentucky not, delivering at times. Even though they did really well in conference play, what we kind of kept forecasting eventually hit hard for Kentucky last season at the worst possible moment that it could possibly hit last year for the Wildcats. So I think making this list this year with the number of good backcourts and some of the things we saw last year made me rethink a lot of my thinking this year. But I will say this. I don't think this is clear cut on who the top 5 are by any means this year. So my hope is that in making this list that me and you came up with 2 completely different lists. I think we'll have the same number 1, but I think ultimately we should, because of the wide variety of different thinking and variance in these backcourts and how strong the SEC looks at a guard play this year, we should come up with some very different answers this year in our individual top 5 lists.
Yeah, I think I created, deleted, and recreated my list at least 4 to 5 times.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I'm still not even completely sold on it. So, like I said, there's been a lot of change, a lot of new, and as always, a lot of freshmen that may or may not perform the way that they're supposed to.
Yeah, right. Did you have any honorable mentions? Just wanted to throw that out there because, like I said, there's so many that there's going to be teams with good backcourts that we don't list in the top 5 and could very easily, in actuality, be in the top 5. It's just a lot of unknown variants.
So for my honorable mention, I wasn't sure how many we could have, so I just listed one, but there were several that I went back and forth on mentioning. Ended up with Texas A&M. They returned Wade Taylor. They returned Jace Carter and Manny Obaseki, who all had extremely well planned out games, obviously very talented players. They just couldn't turn it around as a team. So I think, we look at Buzz here and see kind of what he does to get this to move in more of a team aspect direction, because we saw that the talent was there, namely Wade Taylor. I mean, I talked about it.
We know that what Wade Taylor can do. The only not disappointment in Texas A. Well, I can't say that because Boots was good too, but we knew who Wade Taylor was.
Yeah. So I think, if we see more of a team format kind of form this season, and you take that talent that they had last year, you take the growth from guys like Jace Carter, and they have some decent freshmen coming in as well. I think this could be a really good backcourt, and it's very, very experienced in SEC and NCAA play. So I think that plays a lot into my honorable mention qualifications.
Yeah, I like that. Also adding Zert Phillips at a SMU. I wish he was a better 3-point shooter. That's really what they kind of lacked finding in that. But they did add CJ Wilcher out of Nebraska, who shot 39.4%. So should play some level of contribution to A&M next season. But Zert Phelps is obviously a player at a SMU that it's getting a lot of interest. He's a good player as well that A&M added. For my honorable mentions, I went with 2 teams, and I almost put one of these in the top 5. I mean, like you, I kept reshuffling, rethinking. And my 2 teams that I pulled out for honorable mentions are Florida and Ole Miss. For Florida, this is a decent situation for Florida to be in the backcourt. There's not a ton of depth in their backcourt. I want to mention that, and I think that's why I ultimately moved them out. And then 3-point shooting was the other issue. Now, Walter Clayton, great 3-point shooter. He hits that 36% mark that you're looking for, 36.5% last season. Almost delivered close to 88% from the charity stripe last year. Went out for the NBA Combine last year, ultimately comes back to college. They also returned Will Richard, who's also in the similar situation, coming back for his senior year after doing a little bit of NBA workout, shot 80% from the free throw line, but ultimately just not quite as good as a 3-point shooter as Clayton was. Will Richard just below that threshold line. And then their big addition out of the portal into their backcourt was Elijah Martin. Elijah Martin, though, he was good for Florida Atlantic, but from everything I'm reading here in the preseason, there is an element of unknown with Elijah Martin because they're going to try to my understanding, try to put him in a new position that works out for him a little bit more in a possible NBA future. So there is an element of unknown in Florida's backcourt as well, outside of the depth of how Elijah Martin handles playing points, because he ran a lot of 2 and 3 for Florida Atlantic. So he's going to be looked at as the number one for Florida this coming season. So that'll be an interesting area. But they also lost a lot for Florida and Zylan Pullen last season. And then Riley Kugel, who played on the wing. Just a lot of good players who are no longer with the Gators. That said, I think this is still a really good Gators team, and their backcourt's got good pieces, and I'm interested to see how that develops. For Ole Miss, look, anytime you bring back, key pieces, that's a good sign. And Ole Miss, I think, got better this offseason. Not only did they return Matthew Morrell, who shot 39.8% from three last season. He's a really good player. Morrell is a guy that we always seem to get excited about. And then Jalen Murray's back, also another good three-point shooter out of their backcourt. A little bit on the smaller side, but a good player. And then they also added in the portal, Dre Davis out of Seton Hall, who's a really good scorer, can shoot a little bit. They added Davin Barnes, another good shooter, 39.1% from deep. And then the guy that, I'm the most excited about for Ole Miss getting was Sean Badula out of Virginia Tech. Great player, 16.4 points per game last year. He didn't shoot that magical 36% we're all looking for from the three-point line, but he also shot a lot, and he was leaned on heavily at Virginia Tech. So I'm going to be interested to see what we see out of Sean Padula this coming season. So those are my two honorable mentions. Again, you can just already see because our honorable mentions are totally different. So I'm curious to see how the top five list goes. So Maddie, if you want to kick off our top five.
All right. We starting at five?
Starting at five.
Starting at five. Okay. So this team, they lost a lot. It went back and forth on if I was going to mention them in here, but my number five, I've got the Tennessee Volunteers.
Okay.
Namely, Zakiya Ziegler. Love this guy. He's a great player. He showed a lot of grit coming back from that injury. We've got Chaz Lanier coming in, Jordan Gainey and Jemiah Mashak both staying as well. All players who gave us a strong resume last year to be able to be considered in our top fives here. Like I said, they lost a lot of production.
Oh, yeah, no, for sure.
Namely, don't connect. They lost a little bit in their front court as well. But this backcourt, I feel like, is still very, very strong. Mentioned Chaz Lanier coming in. He was one of the best transfers this season. So I think he is going to add a lot to this backcourt. But I feel like it's stacked. I feel like they've got a little bit of depth. They've got some freshmen coming in that could definitely help that out as long as, freshmen don't freshman the way we usually say they will. But yeah, so I've got the Volunteers in here. I think they're going to be a good team, but I think it's going to be a lot different from their expectations of last season.
Yeah, I've got Tennessee in my list. I don't have them at number 5. So I'll definitely come back around and talk a little bit more on Tennessee's situation there. For my number 5, so I went back and forth with this, and I almost said forget it. Florida's number 5, and I finally just said this is just a matter of how you look at it, and fans are both going to claim that they belong in the top 5. So congratulations to Kentucky and Arkansas, who are now tied at 5th on my list. I couldn't really tie break this because I thought it was just a matter of perspective between these two teams. One major theme these teams have in common, all theory. No actual proof of concept. This is completely redone on both sides. As I was mentioning earlier, Arkansas lost 91.3% of their offensive production from last season. It's entirely gone out of the backcourt for the Razorbacks. Kentucky lost 100%, and unless you lived under a rock, you know why. SMU got a new coach. So here's why I really can't break these two apart, because on that matter of perspective. For Kentucky, they got a bunch of players who fit Mark Pope's offensive design. Kirk Kasai, Kobe Brea, solid three-point shooters. Lamont Butler is a good defender and a good facilitator. Ortega Away is a good shooter, but finished kind of rough at the end of the season. But ultimately, he's also a good driver of the basketball and a physical guard, and is a capable defender. He makes a prototypical number 3 for the way that Pope runs offense. Jackson Robinson is a terrific sixth man and gives some continuance from Mark Pope's time at BYU. Analytics aren't crazy about what some of these guys bring defensively on the end of the court, but that's kind of like Alabama. I think they're going to score a lot of points, and this is a team that's capable of putting up 1.25 points per possession, which rounds out to 85 points per game, which will be in the top half of the SEC if numbers hold from last year. So a very capable team in backcourt. Like I said, there's concerns. It's an unproven concept. Analytics aren't really in love with this team defensively. They're seeing a lot of glares and not a lot of high projective. I do think also Mark Pope's offensive system will play a little bit of that because there is a way that Mark Pope's offensive system, can just leave defenders kind of hanging in transition. So there are issues, but I don't think it's bad, and I think it's a really good backcourt and is well constructed and thought out. And I think Kentucky, they can find success with this. For Arkansas, didn't have a high volume of transfers in the portal like Kentucky did, but they got big time players in the backcourt. They got Janelle Davis out of Florida Atlantic, who played some big time basketball and played in the Final Four 2 years ago. He also shot 50% from the corner, last season while at Florida Atlantic. Talented guy and one of the best transfers in the country. Then you got DJ Wagner, who struggled at Kentucky last season, but is part of that core that John Calipari is bringing over with him from Kentucky. And while numbers won't jump off the page, if you're just looking at last season, he's heavily considered to have a sophomore season breakout. Additionally, Evan Maya and several experts also feel the same way on this. He's a capable passer, and while Kentucky fans might deny it right now because of the change of the guard, Kentucky was a better team with him running point last year. Some of Kentucky's biggest losses came from games that Wagner didn't play or didn't play more than 18 minutes. Gonzaga, UNC Wilmington, Oakland. Granted, in that Oakland game, none of the freshmen played well. But yet, Kentucky was a better team with DJ Wagner on the floor, whether they believe that or not, want to believe that or not. So it was a good addition to bring DJ Wagner over to give some continuance, and is a player that's looking to make a breakout this next year because he was highly, highly sought after and a highly ranked freshman coming into last season. I believe he was number one in the SEC. Last season was either him or Justin Edwards. Neither one of those guys really produced to what the level we thought they were going to, but we could expect possibly DJ Wagner having a big sophomore year because he's really talented. And then you got freshmen, and freshmen make me nervous, and we've had this conversation for a while. Boogie Fland should be one of the top freshmen in the SEC, and he looks like a first rounder, possibly lottery pick, outside late lottery pick. Carter Knox and Billy Richmond are also strong wings that Calipari brought in and have NBA potential. Knox and Fland are also decent shooters from outside. That said, Boogie Fland has a tendency to make some poor shot selections at times. He only shot 30% at Iowa, and a lot of that had to do with the choices he was making shooting the basketball. He just shot some really bad shots, and that really put an impact on his three-point shooting. So that's my biggest takeaways. While defense is probably my biggest concern with Kentucky, depth and shooting are my issues with Arkansas and why I won't move them up higher on the list outside of being unproven products. But this is both these teams should be interesting to follow in the backcourt next season.
Okay. I mean, I like both of those picks. I've got one on my list that we'll talk about a little bit later. But moving on to my number 4, I've got the Auburn Tigers.
Okay.
So obviously they're returning a lot of production in their front court, but their backcourt, I think, could be sneaky comparable to last season. While it wasn't the best at times, we've still got JP Pigs, Denver Jones, Miles Kelly, and Chad Baker-Mazara in this lineup. All proven talent. We got Chad Baker-Mazara last year, kind of became what I like to call the bad boy of the SEC because it seemed like every game he was getting into a fight. But
well, we saw what happened against Yale.
Yeah. So, I think there's something to say about him, and then keep a Janai Broome in there, and I think they're going to be the dynamic duo that Auburn's going to look towards, and I think he is going to be a big producer in this backcourt this season.
Yeah, Bruce Pearl said a lot of good things about CBM over this offseason, and this is expected to be a big year for CBM for Auburn. So I also have Auburn on my list. I will come back around to them when they pop up on my list, just as I was saying with Tennessee. But yeah, I'm not surprised that both of us do have Auburn on our list. it's a good backcourt, and it's one that's very capable in this conference. All right, so my number 4, I've got the Texas Longhorns. Texas confuses the ever-loving heck out of me. So I ran the numbers, getting ready for this year's season previews, which are coming up in about 3 weeks. Texas meets all 3 of the parameters that we can measure for a national title contender here in the preseason. Now, I'm not calling them that because there are additional parameters that get looked at during the course of the season, but, and if you want to know what those parameters are, go check our first episode of March Madness and you can see those and how that works. But that big board we produced for March Madness last year both had both Purdue and UConn in the best fits for the national championship. Both of them ended up in the national title game. 3 of our 4, I do believe, teams on the big board out of the final 4 all came from our big board in Alabama, UConn, and Purdue. North Carolina State was the only surprise. So like they checked some interesting boxes, and for that point, Texas can be darn good if this backcourt actually comes together, and that's a big reason why I had to move them in front of Kentucky and Arkansas, but they're also unproven like Kentucky and Arkansas. Not even Auburn, though, hit those parameters like the experts and us put together look at for national title contenders. That's not a shot at Auburn. That's saying that there's something going on here under the surface with Texas, and they can be extremely dangerous. But this backcourt, like Arkansas, like I said, unproven. There's a lot of transfers and freshmen here. The only player that is returning for Texas in their backcourt is Chendell Weaver, who was more of a role-playing guard last year for Texas. But this overall, when you look at the freshmen, they got one of the best freshmen in the country coming in Trey Johnson. Trey Johnson is an absolute shooter. You can watch our freshman 15 video on him for more, but he can shoot. He's an improving passer, and he looks to be a lottery pick for the NBA draft this coming season. For transfers, you liked Indiana State last year, you're going to like what Texas put together. Julian Larry and Jason Kent were both coming from Indiana State to Texas. Kent is a big body guard who can put up points and rebounds. Julian Larry can shoot the dang basketball, and he can facilitate over 40% from 3 last season. You're also adding Tremont Mark, who was Arkansas's best player last season. He has a mid-range game, which kind of drove me absolutely nuts last season, but he's got it. And the reason it drove me nuts is he has a habit of kind of settling for it when you don't need to settle for it. Hopefully that can be coached out of him under Terry. But he's also an effective 3-point shooter who shot over 36% from deep last season, and he does a decent job of rebounding, and he plays very good defense. One of the few bright spots for Arkansas's disaster last year. We're also adding Jordan Pope, who should be a big part of the backcourt for this upcoming season. Highly sought after transfer who put up 17 points a game last year, shoots well from the foul line. He can facilitate a little bit. He's still getting better and better, and he's only a junior. I like this ad for Texas a lot. This backcourt looks extremely promising for the Longhorns, but I really think the story is going to be intriguing. This backcourt has to come together because the front court doesn't look amazing. So if the backcourt doesn't work, it's going to be a rough year for Texas. If the backcourt does work and lives up to expectations, is the front court going to be problematic to the point where it doesn't matter what Texas did in the backcourt? So it's kind of 2 key questions, right, for Texas, but all signs point to this should be a promising backcourt for the Longhorns.
Yeah, I've got Texas in my list. Also, we're going to get a lot of redundancy in my next couple that you've already talked about. But, I mean, I think Texas is going to be a good team, and I think kind of their secret sauce here is going to be if this backcourt meshes well together. Jumping into my number 3, David's already mentioned them on the list. Call me a homer if you will, but I've got Arkansas. I mean, mainly looking at here, we've got Johnell Davis, one of the best transfers in this year's transfer class, along with quite a bit of production from over in Kentucky. We've got DJ Wagner and Adu Thiero coming in, and a huge crop of outstanding freshmen.
Yeah, I agree with the addition to that. I do put the caveat in there. Adu Thiero, listed as a guard, plays whatever position you want to play him to play at. So it's a wild card. Like, I was saving it for my front court discussion. But I had to, as soon as you mentioned Adu Thiero, I had to throw that out there. It's like listed as a guard, plays whatever. Like,
Yeah.
he
A
does.
Fiero in my just like if I had to describe what position he plays, he is a Swiss Army knife of a man.
Man plays basketball. That's the position he plays. He plays basketball.
Exactly. So I mean, like you said, listed as a guard. I usually think of him more in the forward spot, but we did see last year those improvements, around the perimeter, being able to make better passes, have higher IQ on the floor, which I think is kind of a big show for your backcourt. So I think you take Wagner, who, like you said, had some excellent games, some good highlights. And I mean, he was with a team that had trouble meshing at points, apparently had a lot going on kind of in the background. So it'll be interesting to see the transition and kind of growth from last year to this year and see how he meshes with those like Janelle Davis, if he's able to lead some of these freshmen based off of his experience and what we're going to get out of this Arkansas team. But something about Calipari is that he's always got a good, solid offensive team, usually powered from his backcourt. So I think we're going to see a good Arkansas backcourt this season. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, I will throw in one more thing that I didn't discuss in my portion of Arkansas's discussion and Kentucky last season. One of those things is that Welch is no longer an assistant coach on Calipari's staff, and he was a big part of changing the way that Kentucky played offense last season and going to the style that they played last year. Um, I will say that is something to also consider, and that maybe a change of offensive direction would also either benefit DJ Wagner or hinder DJ Wagner and his facilitating ability. So I'll be interested to see how that works with Kenny Payne now as an assistant coach for John Calipari. We've seen him have success at Kentucky, but we can make Kenny Payne jokes all day long about
I
his
was gonna
tenure.
say, I mean, Kenny Payne won all those games, so
Kenny
he's
Payne
about
won
to win
those
all these
games.
games.
Yeah, and the success that he had at Louisville. Success. Just I conspiracy theory time. Kenny Payne was a plant by John Calipari to Louisville is one of my favorite conspiracy theories in sports. But yeah, no, honestly, I will be interested to see how DJ Wagner does in a different system. But yeah, now we got Arkansas both listed for both of us on there. We're clear to say that we were kind of in somewhat of a consensus on Arkansas. Another team that we obviously have a consensus about is Tennessee, as they're my number 3 team. As you mentioned, big losses for the Vols this offseason connect Triple J, Santiago Vescovi, and others in this backcourt. Big hits to production there. But Tennessee got some replacements and retained a little bit on the retention end. You were mentioning Zakai Ziegler. He's problematic for any team on the off when they're holding on the offensive side of the ball. I mean, Z is a great defender. And then you're also keeping Gainey and Meshack for this team. And we're gonna see if Cameron Carr steps up this coming season, if he can get the job done. He was one of the top 15 freshmen coming into the SEC last year. Let's see what year 2 looks like for him. Not a strong recruiting class by any means for this Tennessee teams. You're only adding one player in Bishop Boswell in the top 100 players in the country, but overall, the transfers are where I think Tennessee will remain one of the better backcourts in the SEC. Darling Stone Dubar shot almost 40% from 3 last year. Big guard, rebounds well. Let's see his jump from the SEC from Hofstra. I'm also going to talk a little bit here very lightly because I'm also saving it for my front court discussion. But 6'10 Igor Milicic and the front court, he's going to mix in on the backcourt. It's going to be wild having someone that size. He's like kind of, we were just talking about to do with the arrow. Where do you want him to play? And at 6'10, he's just kind of that dude. So he'll make a contribution to the backcourt, which is something to consider. That's how he was ran at Charlotte, and we'll see how it works out and what Rick Barnes has in mind. But this, I didn't weigh much for him, but he's a consideration that it's going to be something that we're going to see a 6'10 guy playing the 3, maybe even the 2 for Tennessee if they decide to go that route. And then there's J.S. Lanier from North Florida, 44% from 3 last year, 88% from the free throw line, 4.8 rebounds per game. One of the best transfers in the country. A lot of people talking about if Barnes can do with Lanier what he did with Dalton Knecht last season. And make him one of the best players in the conference, in the country. So this is an exciting pickup for the Vols and probably a big portion of why a lot of people remain optimistic on what this year is going to look like for the Volunteers in the backcourt. So I like what they've done. I've liked a little bit of what they retain. You wish they could retain more. You're going to miss guys like Dalton Connect, obviously. Even though Santiago Vescovi struggled last year, you know what he was his junior year and how much of a contributor he was there and his shooting ability. So, I mean, it's going to be some questions, but Tennessee looks to have a good backcourt, and there's a core there to keep consistency as well, which I like for the Volunteers. Really like what Tennessee's put together. We'll see what they do, but they should be remaining one of the better teams in the SEC this coming year.
Yeah, they were kind of a big question mark for me after we saw, everybody kind of either graduating or moving on to the NBA. So I think they did a lot in my mind to kind of build themselves back up to the tier where we're still going to put them in a decent place before we see what they can do this season.
Absolutely. All right, Maddie, who do you have for your number 2 backcourt?
All right, moving on to number 2, one of your slightly undecided and untested teams. I'm talking about the Texas Longhorns.
Okay, so you're going for it. You're just going to roll the dice and say this is untested, but I like it.
I mean, you mentioned all the players that I was gonna mention here. Trey Johnson coming in, one of the best freshmen in this class. Like I said, freshmen, not 100% sure what they're gonna do, but if he's anything like they're expecting, he may lead Texas.
Maybe in scoring. We'll see.
Yeah. I mean, and then you've got Jordan Pope, an excellent player when you're talking about front court, somebody that, I think was a hot topic throughout, trying to get him to come over with them. And like I said, Tremont Mark, one of the only bright spots in Arkansas season, he can get it done behind the 3. Like I said, he's got the mid-range game, which I think is a key factor in proving your backcourt. You've got to have somebody that can shoot inside and not, only rely on their 3-point game.
Is listening right now. You need to stop saying anything about the mid-range being positive. No, I'm kidding.
I mean, because when you have these players who rely on 3-point, if you have a night that they're off from 3, they don't have much else to offer.
That should have been an episode we did this offseason when we had nothing to talk about for a little bit. Is like, and that's probably an episode we need to save. Some is the mid range still alive? But Tremont Mark is a very good mid range shooter. Yeah, I agree with you.
And then one of their other big spots coming in is Julian Larry. You mentioned him a little bit. I think he's going to mesh very well with Rodney Terry, and I think he is going to improve his game massively from last season.
And a team with a winning culture as well, which is always helpful to bring players who've won into a team. Indiana State made a good run in the NIT. Probably should have been an NCAA tournament team last year. So yeah, that's going to be a fun conversation to have ahead. What Texas puts together. I want to touch on Trey Johnson real fast. It was interesting reading some of the remarks that Rodney Terry's had on Trey Johnson since we're wrapping up Texas here. Talking about like he had played Cason Wallace in high school and put 40 points up on him. Cason Wallace is a good defender. So there's a lot of fear about what Trey Johnson might possibly be able to do. There's also some concern that he's also kind of like Boogie Fland to make some bad shots. He's not afraid to shoot it. Let me just put it that way. So that might be his biggest climbing ladder, to get to the level of being a college guard. So we'll see how he does with shot selection and a few other things as well. But he's obviously a very interesting player and a big talented piece for Texas next season. I'm excited to watch Trey Johnson play. He's going to be one of the best shooters in this conference, hopefully, if all projections come out right on what the thinking is on Trey Johnson. All right, Maddie, we have hit. No, I've still got to do my number 2. All right.
I was about to say, are we missing one for you?
Yeah, no, I got a number 2 in here. My number 2, you already mentioned them. I told you it was on my list. It's the Auburn Tigers. They lost Trey Donaldson to the transfer portal this offseason, but they didn't take any major hits from last season. They did lose Aiden Holloway, and that's not necessarily the biggest loss that you're from a stats projection from last year. He is projected to have a breakout season, according to Evan Mia. So maybe a small hit, but it's an unproven one as of now. But what they've retained is good. Denver Jones and CBM, good players. Both shot over 40% from three last year. You mentioned this, and I kind of talked to you a little bit about it. Pearl is big on CBM on this upcoming season and has hinted an outside chance that he may make the NBA draft for this coming draft. This was an important summer for him. We'll see if the work is paid off. Don't forget, while I do think the numbers were a little bit inflated last year for Auburn because of a weaker schedule. They did turn in one of the best adjusted defensive numbers in KenPom last year. Out of the transfer portal, the big ad was JP Pegues. Pegues is kind of flying under the radar out of the portal, but he's got some deserved attention. He comes from a very good mid-major program that I like a lot in Furman, and he has proven himself against good talent and power conference teams, particularly in that Virginia upset in the NCAA tournament 2 years ago. Good shooter, good rebounder for his size. I'll be interested to see what he can do with more talent surrounding him. If he breaks out or if he becomes just another depth piece for Auburn, I like him. I really like what Furman does as a program. I'm excited to watch Pegues play in the SEC. They also added two really good freshmen in Pettiford, and he's a good freshman guard coming for Auburn this season. And Ja'Kai Howard is a strong wing. Both guys are four-star freshmen in the top 15 freshmen coming to the SEC for this upcoming season. Now, I mentioned that there were some numbers for Auburn that I felt like a little inflated. And one, I don't want to paint the picture that was entirely on the backcourt from last season because we kind of saw it in that Yale game. Yale shot 45% from three last season, which, yeah, most of that's on the backcourt's perimeter defense. But some of that was in the front court too, with Danny Wolf playing strong against Auburn's front court. That's part one. Part two, it was kind of fine that Auburn's defense may have not been as, what numbers indicated because most of the defenses in the SEC weren't great. In fact, we talked about it on an episode last season. Offenses were way up in the SEC and defenses were well below average across the board last year. Exception being Tennessee, who won the regular season. Auburn having a top 10 offense last year nationally was more than enough for them to do well in the SEC, given some of these defenses that we saw last year. Auburn having that, and then there's part three of this. We're going to get a clear picture on who Auburn is this year. They're going to Maui, and that's a tough field that we're going to see in Maui. So come like week 6 through 9, we should get a very clear picture on who Auburn is this season. But overall, my thoughts, good backcourt and a backcourt that should be talked about. And I just have some fair questions, I think, about just what was this team last year? They win the SEC tournament. But obviously they had a very weak non-conference schedule. They didn't get a quad one win or they had one quad one win until the SEC tournament. And then they get beat in the first round by a mid-major program. There's a lot to consider, on who Auburn is exactly, but they're a team that I feel good about. And I think their backcourt has got some really, really good pieces. Auburn fans, if you don't feel like these questions are fair, we're going to talk about it a lot more on the season preview episode, because I do think Auburn's going to be a darn good basketball team. And I just think they deserve to be talked about. And I do think that gap between Alabama and Auburn for this upcoming season is smaller than what people are suggesting it may be right now in talks. But Auburn's my number 2 backcourt. I think they're a really good backcourt, and I'm excited to see how it turns out for them this year.
Yeah, I think, it's going to be very interesting to see kind of how this team meshes together, especially with so much experience and the newcomers that show like they're going to have a lot of potential. I mean, I feel like Auburn was kind of one of those, not shocks, but it seemed like they were always doing better than what they were expected.
It was also
always waiting for the other shoe to drop or something like that with Auburn last season.
It was weird. It was a weird situation because they just didn't have a resume that looked like the seed they deserved until the SEC tournament was over. And I kept saying that over and over again to a lot of upset Auburn fans about that. And then in game 1, they get the seed they felt like they deserved, and they lose that game against Yale. And it's just, who are you? Well, honestly,
what are we doing here?
Yeah, honestly, I felt like a lot of the analytics for Auburn were inflated last season, and a lot of those metrics that are looked at for picking seeds in the NCAA tournament and the quad one wins just weren't there for a very extended period of time. We're going to find out this year. Because the non-conference should be much stronger. And I hope that defenses are improved in the SEC this year because, I mean, let's face it, for a conference that's normally got really good defenses, they didn't have a ton. There weren't a ton of really good defenses last year. Way just a mess. And Arkansas being bad under an Eric Musselman team that's normally got a good defense being atrocious also did not help those averages at all when it came to the SEC. So we're gonna find out who Auburn is. I'm optimistic. I think they're a good basketball team, but we'll get that vibe here pretty soon.
Yeah. So number one, I'm gonna go Vanderbilt and Mark Byington.
No, is that your move? All right, all right. I love it. I
Convicted.
love the Mark Byington and Vanderbilt pick for the best backcourt in the SEC. Love it.
Absolutely not. It's the team everybody was expecting both of us to say. The only one that we haven't mentioned yet is going to be the University of Alabama.
Yep, we can talk about
Obviously,
this jointly if you want, and just give everybody some time. But I'm also number one Alabama.
yeah. I mean, if Mark Sears would have gone to the NBA, we may have had a complete different conversation, and this backcourt list would have been even more of a cluster than it currently is. But Mark Sears is back, possible National Player of the Year. You've got Aiden Holloway coming in, Latrell Wrightsell coming back, and transfer Chris Youngblood, who are all promising backcourt stars. But big picture here, you got Mark Sears under Nate Oates.
What's not to love about that? Like, I mean, like seriously. No, you're right. Mark Sears, he's got a chance to win Player of the Year. He's in that conversation kind of in the preseason already. It's already been talked about on national shows. He's got a chance. If Alabama is anywhere close to where they were last year and they're getting a lot of hype and they're in the top 3 in the SEC with a shot to win the SEC championship, or they win the SEC championship, I'm talking minimum expectations. They start making a run in the NCAA tournament. Mark Sears has a real chance of winning Player of the Year. It absolutely can happen. For this Alabama team, I'm like you. The players you got on here, offense, and more offense. It's going to be overwhelming, and there's going to be a lot of teams who cannot run. It doesn't matter how well you play defense, it might feel like, if a team is putting up 120 points a game. I don't think that's actually what's going to happen, but like I'm saying, they have shooters, and they have guys who can put up points on this, especially in the backcourt. 4 players who shot over 40% from last season from 3. Then you got Aiden Holloway, who you mentioned. It's projected to have a breakout year, according to Evan Mia. They really like what they've got, and they think that he'll do extremely well in Nate Oates' system. There's a lot of expectation that Aiden Holloway may have been one of the best transfers in the country for this move. They've also added top 35 freshman LeBaron Filan, who's joined the team. Nas Cunningham and Darian Ford are also top drawer wings who are very large and can play in a hybrid capacity. My only concern with Alabama, and everyone's going to say this, is defense.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something you're going to hear a lot, throughout the course of this last year. Let's not get it mixed up. Alabama's defense was serviceable last year at moments. There were some games also where they just teams would light them up. Like that is also true as well. And Tennessee and Kentucky made strong cases for why the defense has got to improve in Alabama.
Yeah, and I think, Alabama was going to obviously be without a shadow of a doubt, my number one pick. But kind of what played into that was looking at the latter half of the season, namely the NCAA tournament. When we saw, that their defense needed to get the job done, and they did. So we know they can make improvements. We know they've got new talent coming in. I'm interested to see how Nate Oates kind of takes the criticism throughout the season of, all offense team and works on that defense a little bit.
Yes, I'm with you 100%. Whatever's going to happen in this defense is just got to happen this offseason. Like, this is my biggest concern, is that Alabama made the Final Four last year, and everyone right now is feeling like they should make the Final Four again. And they have the offense to do it. But I really ask people to look at KenPom right now and the stats from last year. And if you look at those adjusted defenses, offenses, team built like Alabama, who had highly efficient offenses and subpar defenses, had a huge, and I mean huge, variety of places they ended up at the end of last season. When you look at it, you had teams like Alabama make the Final Four, And then you had teams like Iowa who didn't even make the tournament. Like it's crazy how that worked out. And I don't think that's going to happen, Alabama. I don't think they're going to not make the tournament. I think they got too many good players, especially in this backcourt like Mark Sears, who are more than capable of getting Alabama back, making a good run, ending at least top 6 somewhere in the SEC. But like, you've got to address the defense this offseason. You have to, because there's just a wide variety of anywhere your season can go if you don't fix the defense. Alabama's more than talented enough to go out and maybe even win a national championship. They also may have a defense that it causes enough concern where they may get bumped out in the first round. Like there's a wide places this can go if numbers look like they did last season, because it just takes running into a team who's also very, very good on the offensive end. I ask people again to consider what happened in that Kentucky game when they went to Lexington. They found a team who could also shoot with them, and that caused a lot of problems. They also ran into teams throughout the course of the tournament like UConn, who were really good on offense, and Alabama could not stop UConn's offense. It happens. But overall, for this backcourt, a lot of talent, a lot of good pieces. They're going to have to turn it up on defense and stop a lot of these other teams, especially around that perimeter, because if they run into another good three-point shooting team, that's where I start getting concerned.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I think we look at kind of whatever flip they switched, Mike secret stuff that they were given during the tournament, and maybe turn around some of those defensive hopes. Because there were flashes. There were flashes in some of those games where they needed to turn it on, and they did. So I think they're maybe figuring it out, and maybe some of these new transitional pieces will help them defensively.
I think what really is going to help Alabama, and I wish more teams, and we're going to talk about this more on the season preview stuff, is the way they schedule. Is that they went into the tournament unafraid of the situation that they were in. Remember that stretch where they played Purdue, Creighton, and Arizona last year? Lost all 3 of those games. They knew how to play at that point. They had seen tournament talent, and they'd seen a lot of it. They'd seen Ohio State. They'd seen Oregon. Oregon was another tournament team. Iowa State, I believe, made the NIT and was close to making the tournament last year. Not necessarily a bubble team, but outside looking in. There was a list of really quality opponents that Alabama played last year. So Alabama got to work on that defense. But this backcourt, when you got a guy like Mark Sears, you were talking about Mike's secret stuff. Mark Sears was Mike's secret stuff last year for Alabama, because that dude played his butt off in that NCAA tournament. Then other guys stepped up around him, rising to his level. He's a guy who makes everybody on the court better. He absolutely is. And I think that's why both of us, when we're looking at this thing, when we think about the overwhelming offense that Alabama has, and then a guy like Mark Sears who makes everybody on that team better, there's no choice. You have to make Alabama the best backcourt in the SEC. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'm glad we're back. Hope we didn't ramble too much at certain points of the show. We're maybe still a little bit rusty. I don't know. This felt pretty good as an episode, but thank you guys for watching. If you have not already, please do us a favor. Hit that like button and please subscribe to the show. We really appreciate it. For you guys who don't know, 1,000 subscribers is a huge mark on YouTube, and we're getting closer and closer to that. So I ask you, if you got friends who like basketball, send them the direction of the show. If you guys like what we're talking about and you like to know what's going on in basketball throughout the course of the off season, throughout the season, the whole process, and just want a show that's a little bit more driven on your team, your conference, the games that you're going to watch, please consider subscribing to the channel. Hit that notification bell for when new videos come out. We got a lot of content coming out. We're still wrapping up the Portal series. We're a little bit halfway done with that one. Then our first 3 episodes, our first 2 are out now, and our third one on Carter Knox should be coming out soon for the Freshman 15 series, where we count down the top 15 freshmen according to 24/7 Sports coming to the SEC this season. So that's going to include a lot of darn good players. A lot of players Alabama has, a lot of players that Arkansas has. Auburn, you can keep going down the list. The top teams bringing in top talent. So it's going to be a very, very exciting year for the freshman class that's coming in. And it also, this freshman class, we haven't talked about it much, is widely considered to be one of the best freshman classes in years as far as NBA talent goes. So this is going to be a fun year to talk about. So please like and subscribe to the channel, and we'll catch you guys next time.
Thanks, guys. Have a good week.